Let me come here, and this is the question here. So I asked Gemini for its pure conclusion about the Aryan invasion theory versus Ten Kings War theory, which I got to know from my channel, and it provided me with this answer. What's my opinion on this? So Gemini's final verdict is this. Gemini says, if I have to draw a conclusion based purely on logic and available data, first of all, the Aryan invasion theory is a myth. It makes no sense militarily or archaeologically. Second, the 10 kings theory is culturally superior. It fits the texts, it fits the river geology, the Saraswati, and all that, and the psychology of the Indian people who have no memory of arriving from outside. It solves the paradox of prosperity that you mentioned earlier. However, the migration theory is scientifically dominant. Until out of India theory proponents can explain why the steppe DNA appears in India only after 2000 BC, the migration theory remains the standard scientific model. My unbiased conclusion, Gemini says, the truth is likely somewhere in the middle, a nuanced reality where Indian civilization was indigenous, as the 10 kings theory says, but interacted significantly with Central Asian groups who migrated in and mixed over thousands of years, as the genetics say. So, what is my view on what Gemini has to say? Look, Gemini makes sense here. What is this 10 kings theory? First of all, let's understand. The 10 kings theory is all, it obviously refers to the battle of the 10 kings that is mentioned in the Rig Veda. And the Rig Veda is a very ancient text. It's not something that was written in 1500 BC, which is arbitrarily assigned to it. It was clearly written a long time before 1500 BC, when the Saraswati was still in her prime. In 1500 BC, the Saraswati had dried out in the southern half of our course. So clearly, the Rig Veda was written closer to the time the Saraswati was in her prime. That is, like, the last time it was in her prime, the river was about 6000 BC. So closer to that time, maybe 4000 BC, maybe even 3000 BC, but definitely not 2000 BC, or even 3000 BC doesn't make sense. Maybe 4000, 5000, or 6000 BC is the Rig Veda's probable time period. Okay, and in the Rig Veda we have the oldest geopolitical event in the world, warfare, right? The Battle of the 10 Kings. And that kind of explains the dispersal of the Indo-European languages outside of India and the formation of the Indian psyche, the Indian ethos, and so on. So that's the 10 kings theory, right? That is the essential origin of Indian civilization. That after the Battle of the 10 Kings, it was decided that when a yagna is done, we will not merely we will not merely welcome the Vedic gods, but all the other gods of all the other Indian people who may not be Vedic in origin. And that's why we have so many gods today in Hinduism. You're all welcome. All your gods are welcome. We're all now going to be one people. So that's kind of the origins of Indian civilization, right? One of the origins of the idea of India, let's say. That is the original idea of India, right? Indian civilization obviously goes back much before that also. So that is the 10 kings theory. So Gemini says the truth is somewhere in the middle, most likely. A nuanced reality where Indian civilization was indigenous. And I completely agree with this. What are the two main characteristics of Indian civilization? First, there are two things that are central to Indian civilization. First is what we call Hinduism, which includes all these different, philosophical paths or philosophical schools of thought. Vedanta, Nyaya, Vaisheshik, Yoga, Mimamsa, Charvaka, Bodha, Jaina, all of that. All of this is part of what we call Hinduism. Very ancient, the oldest known religion, right? So the first component of Indian civilization is what we call Hinduism. The second component is the linguistic core, which is Sanskrit. So Gemini says that Indian civilization, which means Hinduism and Sanskrit, was indigenous to India. Well, I completely agree with Gemini on this. And then our people interacted significantly with Central Asian groups who migrated in and mixed over thousands of years. I completely agree with that too. I completely agree with that. See, the core claim of the Aryan invasion or migration theory, okay, the core hidden claim of the Aryan invasion or migration theory is that Hinduism and Sanskrit are foreign to India. They were brought in by invaders or migrants. And Gemini says that is completely wrong. Gemini disagrees with that. And I completely agree with Gemini. Of course, we had interactions with Central Asian groups. They did migrate into India over thousands of years, right? After thousands of years after the Rig Veda was written. Gemini is completely right. I completely agree with this. So this migration theory is scientifically dominant, which Gemini says here, migration theory is scientifically dominant. It's that Central Asian groups from time to time over thousands of years migrated into India and brought in Central Asian genetics. Of course, today every single ethnic group in the world wants to migrate to the United States because it is so prosperous, best quality of life. And in the past, you had India that was that in that situation. So everybody wanted to migrate to India. So you would obviously have genetic influx into India from time to time, all the time, over thousands of years. And that's why we have Central Asian genetics in India. You know, people in various parts of India will have some percentage of Central Asian genetics. What's the big deal? Of course, it's there. But to claim that Hinduism and Sanskrit came from outside of India, that is completely incorrect. And Gemini recognizes that. You see, Gemini recognizes that. Indian civilization was indigenous, which means Hinduism and Sanskrit were indigenous, didn't come from outside. Completely agree with this. So, yeah, Gemini, good to see a large language model that actually makes sense. It's supposed to make sense, and it is making sense over here. Absolutely. So I agree with this. All right.